Through an example, we will discuss how we go about writing logic in pseudocode, how we go about describing an algorithm using pseudocode. So, in general, your language should talk about the problem and it should not discuss about how it is going to be implemented in that particular language. So, let me explain what I mean by that. Suppose you would want to read some number from the user. So you will rather say get a number from the user, which is common English. Whereas if you had written it in C, you would say scanf percentage d address of num. This is implementation defined. This is the way it is implemented in C. But if you're implementing it in not sorry, if you're implementing in any other language, this particular language will not be clear to the person who is not familiar with C. So you should talk about how you're going to solve the problem in an English like manner and not in a manner of any programming language. So let me discuss let me show you some of the common keywords which are used in pseudocode. So suppose you want to read input or you want to get input from the user from the keyboard. You will say either read, you will say either input, you will say get or scan. These all mean the same. There's no difference between any of these. Suppose you want to display the result of your calculation or you want to display the output, then you will say print, display, show or write. These all mean the same. If we have to do certain calculations, okay, or as they are called computations, you will use the word compute, calculate or determine. Assume there are variables and you want to give them certain initial values like 0, 10 or 20 or whatever it is. So you will say set I is given the value 0. You will say set I to 0 or you will say init j to 0. So this is examples of how you will use keywords when you're writing pseudocode. So in order to help you understand, let's take a few approaches which are not recommended and then I'll show you approaches which are recommended. So if you're trying to increase the value of I by 1, this is not a good way to describe it in pseudocode because this may not be clear to a person who does not know a modern programming language like C or Java. So a better way to show the increase in value of I by 1 is an English like way. So you will write something like this: increment the value of I by 1. So this is the preferred way in a pseudocode. This is a way you are better avoid it. Then suppose I have to calculate the result, that is the sum of two variables a plus b, and store the result in a variable called as result. So I could do something like this. This is approach I would use if I am writing a C program. But as I told you, pseudocode is an English like approach. So this approach is better avoided. I would never recommend you to do this particular approach. Suppose you want to get the result as the sum of a plus b, you will talk about it in an English like manner. You will say calculate result as the sum of a plus a and b. Not even, you can use the word plus, that's fine. So this is easier, or this is used in a pseudocode. This may be used in an algorithm, because if you look at the hierarchy, the topmost you got the problem, the lower level than that is the pseudocode, one level lower than that is the algorithm, the lowest level is the programming language. So if you want a person to understand the logic without getting bothered about the programming language, then be sure you use an English like approach. Now this is all theory, but let me show you through an example how we can write a pseudocode to, say for example, multiply two numbers. So if I have to write a pseudocode to multiply two numbers, I'll do a series of steps. So in the steps, the first thing what I'm going to do here is, in order to multiply, I will require one variable called as a, one variable called as b, and I'll say I'll have another variable called as another variable called as result. Result is going to hold the product of a into b. So the first number is going to come into A, the second number is going to come into B, and the product of A into B is going to come into result. So how would I do something like this in a programming using pseudocode? I would say take variables, okay, A comma B comma, or I can say prod. Okay, prod indicates that it's going to hold the result. Next, what I'm going to say is I want the user to give me the values of A and B. So what I will say, get the values of A and B. Okay, I'll just highlight this A and B so that you know that these are variables. Get the values of A and B, or get values into A and B. They mean the same. So I could read A as 10, B as 30. So A is 10, B is 30. Third step is I want to multiply this. So what I will say is I'll say compute. You have seen the keyword compute the product of A and B and store the result in prod. So what is going to do is, here the multiplication is going to happen and the result is going to be stored in prod. And step 4 is I'm going to say display. I'm going to say product is prod. Okay, so what is going to happen is, on the output screen you're going to have a message like this. It is going to say product is colon, and in this case it will print 300. So this is a simple example of writing a pseudocode in an English like language. So you can see, if this is the way you will have to attempt to write a pseudocode. Don't make it look like any particular language like a C, Fortran, COBOL, or a Java, or any Python, or any of the language. It should be very much English like, so that any person who is not very familiar even with programming is able to understand what is the logical flow of the problem solving process. So that's why it's used in documentation and textbooks of algorithms, data structures and all, because you may understand the logic in English like manner, but implement the logic in any language, whether it is C, C++, Java, Fortran, or any language of your choice, you may implement. That's why pseudocode is a preferred method of explaining the logic of an algorithm or logic of the problem solving process. So I hope this clarifies how you write pseudocode and what is the language you need to use to write a pseudocode.